Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In this edition of Global Print, I'm going to talk to you about the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan Buddhist spiritual leader who has turned 86 years old today. So on behalf of myself, and I hope on behalf of you, dear viewer, I'd like to wish His Holiness a very, very happy birthday and many more to come. But what is even more wonderful is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has picked up the phone and called His Holiness, he's in Dharamshala as you know, and wished him a very, very happy birthday. Now this is not usual at all. Prime Ministers of India do not want to be seen or heard talking to the Dalai Lama, except for Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister. So in a moment I will tell you why this is so special. I will talk to you about the very special relationship, not just between India and Tibet, but also the very special relationship between India and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. But before that, dear viewer, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do subscribe and pay just a little bit for the Print's free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism. You know that we have been bringing to you the best news stories, the best videos over the last several months of the pandemic. So please do continue to support us. In the description of this video, you will find links to subscribe both for an international audience as well as for a domestic one. Now back to my column Global Print on the Print's website, in which I talk about the Dalai Lama. He is 86 years old today. It's his birthday. But also because the Dalai Lama, for the last 62 years, since he fled his beloved Lhasa, his beloved Tibet, after the Chinese moved in, he has lived in India these past 62 years, and he has called himself a son of India. But what has been happening these last several years is that the Chinese and the president of China, since he became president in 2013, that's Xi Jinping, has been increasingly tightening his control, his hold over Tibet in the last 8 years. And just a month or so ago, on the 21st of May 2021, which is on the 70th anniversary of the 17-point agreement that was signed between the Dalai Lama and the Chinese government at the time in 1951. It was a very, very unequal agreement, which you will see if you read my article. And the Chinese issued a white paper last month commemorating the 70th anniversary of China's control over Tibet. And in this white paper, like in the two other white papers that have been issued during the Xi Jinping regime, the Chinese talked about how the Communist Party of China has expanded its hold, not just its hold over Tibet and its influence over Tibet, but how it has liberated Tibet from the feudal yoke and set it upon the path of economic progress. Now that is true, because if you travel to Tibet, you will see how the landscape has completely changed these last 70 years since the Communist Party expanded its influence and its control over Tibet. But unfortunately, and this is truly unfortunate, the Chinese have also stifled every religious and cultural tradition and freedom that the Tibetans have enjoyed these past several hundreds of years. So what is it that the Chinese want? Now the Chinese want every Tibetan to state unequivocally that Tibet has always historically been a part of China. Now that is a plain untruth, because over the centuries, while Tibet has paid tribute to several Chinese emperors, it is also true that Tibet has been an independent nation with the Dalai Lama as its spiritual and temporal leader. So the Tibetans obviously cannot state that. But the Dalai Lama, over the past several decades, while he has been in India, has encouraged a conversation between the Chinese leadership and the Tibetan leadership. For example, the Dalai Lama's elder brother was in conversation with none other than Deng Xiaoping in order to arrive at a compromise where both sides could leave the ugly past behind and move on to a more pleasant future. Now, the Dalai Lama has said unequivocally that Tibet is a part of China, although the Chinese leadership have accused him time and again of being a splittist leader. But the Dalai Lama has also said that Tibet should be allowed to keep its religious and cultural autonomy. Now, this is something that the Chinese have refused to accept. But in this white paper that the Xi Jinping regime has released last month, there is a certain shift from the other white papers, and let me tell you what that is. Now, what is interesting is that, of course, like the previous white papers, this document also emphasizes the party, that's the Communist Party of China's control over religious belief. And it invokes a 1997 document, and I'm reading from my column Global Print, which notes that the approval of the reincarnation of the grand living Buddhas by the central government is the key to safeguarding the normal order of Tibetan Buddhism. And it also quotes a 2007 decree that says that reincarnations must be approved by the government. Now, what are the Chinese trying to say? What they are saying is that, yes, the Dalai Lama is old, he's 86 years old. How much longer can he live? And we all know that the Chinese are perhaps the most practical race in the world. So in 1995, if you remember, the Panchen Lama, which is also a very, very senior and respected figure in Tibetan Buddhism, the reincarnation of the Panchen Lama, a 6-year-old boy called Gedun Chokye Nima, he was nominated by none other than the current Dalai Lama, His Holiness. And this boy was removed by the Chinese. They disappeared him from the public eye. He has not been seen since, and installed their own Panchen Lama, a young boy called Gyanke Norbu. Now, clearly the Chinese want to do the same with the Dalai Lama. So in this white paper, they are hinting at a succession. Now, this is the one country, China, under Xi Jinping, which is tightening its control over Tibet. But what is equally interesting, and this is something that has not been in the public domain or has not caught the attention of a lot of people, is that American Buddhists are also trying to expand their influence over the Tibetan Buddhists who live in India. And they have been doing this in a variety of ways. The first is that hundreds of scholarships are being given to Tibetan Buddhists, to the refugees who have been living in India. So the Tibetan diaspora is being increasingly depleted. And significantly, the Namgyal Monastery, which is a monastery in Ithaca in New York State, which is a couple of hours away from New York City, and says that it is a personal monastery of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, although I'm not sure what that means. Now, this Namgyal Monastery has announced that it's going to build a Dalai Lama library and learning center, and it's announced a $5 million fundraising campaign for this. Now, and if you look at the website of the Dalai Lama library, and it's got an AutoCAD, and you will see what they want to do exactly. And what they've said is that they are going to keep all the artifacts of all the Dalai Lamas. Now, we don't know what that means exactly, but we assume that when His Holiness the Dalai Lama Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama, when he fled Lhasa and came to India, he probably brought with him the personal artifacts of his ancestors. We know that, as the reincarnation, he is the 14th reincarnation, so all those that have gone before, that he is the inheritor of all those very special and sacred objects. So the American Dalai Lama library, which is in Ithaca in the state of New York, now wants all these artifacts and books and periodicals and other papers and documentation, and wants to take it over and keep it in its own library. Now, what does that mean? Here is India, which for 62 long years has cherished the Dalai Lama, given him and the large Tibetan community refuge. He has lived in Dharamshala these last several decades. If you go to Dharamshala, dear viewer, and you must go, it is such a lovely little hill town in Himachal Pradesh where the Dalai Lama lives. He occasionally gives audiences to people not just from India but from all over the world. Now, the question is, what is the Indian government doing about this? Does the Indian government even know? Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he picked up the phone and spoke and wished His Holiness a very happy birthday. But perhaps he should ask the Ministry of External Affairs and the External Affairs Minister, Mr. S. Jaishankar, who is a former ambassador to China, what the government's policy is on not just on Tibet but on the Dalai Lama. So the Indian policy on His Holiness has been very up and down, a bit of a roller coaster. In 2014, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi first won power, we know that for his inaugural he invited Lobsang Sangye, then the Prime Minister of the Tibetan government in exile, who is a US citizen and has since left India and gone back to the US, where I have no idea what he's doing there. Also in 2014, and this I must tell you, dear viewer, Prime Minister Narendra Modi asked the Dalai Lama to come and meet him, but it took place in not very happy circumstances. A marked car with darkened windows and an unmarked number plate. And you may ask how I know this, but I do know this because I had done a story on this at the time, and very senior and very reliable sources had confirmed to me, both in the Indian administration as well as in the Tibetan administration, that this had happened. And His Holiness had gone to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2014. Now, in 2017, we see that the Indian government's policy changes a little bit again, a little more in favor of openness. So the Dalai Lama is invited to the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Pranab Mukherjee is president at the time. And also in 2017, he is allowed to go to Tawang, which is the home of a very sacred monastery called the Tawang Monastery. And Tawang is also the birthplace of His Holiness's predecessor, the 6th Dalai Lama. And one of the key disputes between India and China on the boundary issue, or the China's refusal to settle the line of actual control, is that the Chinese want Tawang. They want Tawang precisely because it's the birthplace of the 6th Dalai Lama. Now, Tawang is an integral part of Arunachal Pradesh, which is an integral part of India. So there is no question of India ceding territory to the Chinese, especially when the Chinese have refused to have any serious talks on the boundary issue. And currently, when the Chinese are sitting in Ladakh, having intruded across the line of actual control, there is absolutely no question of India ceding territory in Tawang. So coming back to the Modi foreign policy on the Tibet and the Dalai Lama in the second term, and we saw last year when the Chinese intruded across the LAC into Ladakh, the Indians used the Special Frontier Force, which is a company that comprises of Tibetan refugees, to take the southern bank of the Pangong Tso. And one Tibetan soldier died, and then BJP General Secretary Ram Madhav even travelled to Leh to pay his last respects at the ceremony, at the cremation ceremony of the Tibetan soldier. But Ram Madhav, as we know, has since reverted to the RSS, and the Ministry of External Affairs policy on the Dalai Lama has become a little bit more opaque. For example, we don't know whether the Foreign Secretary has met His Holiness the Dalai Lama these last couple of years, or whether senior officials in the Ministry of External Affairs have met him both in Delhi or in Dharamshala. Of course, in the last year and a half, there has been the pandemic and His Holiness is in isolation. Also, several Buddhist monks contracted the infection. So keeping in mind His Holiness's age, there was no question of him meeting outsiders. One more thing I'd like to say here is about the Karmapa Lama. He is the head of the Karma Kagyu sect, which is one of the 4 sects in Tibetan Buddhism. The Dalai Lama heads one other sect. Now, the Karmapa Lama, Ugyen Trinh Dorji, fled Tibet in 2000 and came to India. He has been in India for the last 21 years, although as we speak he's in Germany somewhere. He left a year or so ago. But in these last 21 years, India's intelligence community continues to believe that he is a Chinese spy, which is quite ridiculous, because he would not, a young lad of 15 or 16 years old, was not going to flee in such difficult wintry conditions in Tibet at the time from the Surfu monastery, which is the home of the Karmapa Lama, and escape to India. Now, the Dalai Lama believes that the Karmapa is the genuine article, but a large section of India's intelligence community refuses to believe that. So on his 86th birthday, on the occasion of His Holiness's 86th birthday, we do hope that Delhi will move to bridge the chasm between itself and Dharamshala and reinvent this once very special relationship. Because one thing is very clear, Delhi's loss of influence over the Dalai Lama is China and America's gain. I've shown you how Xi Jinping is tightening his control over Tibet, but so is the US. It will not stop short at using anything, at using any pawn in its arsenal, including that of the Dalai Lama, in its fight with China for the position of world number one. But remember that India's very special relationship with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, as well as with Tibet, will always remain. So do read my column, Global Print, on the Print's website, and looking forward to hearing your comments on this video. Thank you so much for watching.